As for the breaking of the wudu constantly, it can be put into two categories. One is the suspicion of, or the feeling, or the wahm that your wudu is breaking constantly. So one is not sure, but one has the feeling. One has doubt, but one is not sure. And for that, the very simple hadith of the Prophet ﷺ applies, which is, if you did not hear it or smell it, then consider it that it is, then it should be considered as if you have your wudu, because unless you have, because of doubt, and there's a lot of psychological studies on this, that you can give somebody chocolate and tell them it's strawberry, they're gonna taste strawberry. So the point I'm trying to make is that if you have doubt, then that doubt seems real, and you have done wudu. And in fact, maybe one day I'll actually talk about OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and wudu, because there is a relationship between there, and there's a certain hikmah why the Prophet ﷺ did not want us to exceed beyond 3, because there are people that will sit in the washroom and do wudu over and over and over again, and it becomes like an obsessive compulsive disorder. But the first category is where there's wahm, and in that, the that also the cure, there are a few things about that, but basically do not go beyond 3 no matter what. Okay. And if you're in the masjid, for example, because if you know you're in that state, so unless you smell it or hear it, do not consider your wudu to be broken, specifically if you're in a state where you're never happy with doing it, washing only 3 times. And just as a side note, to wash 4 or 5 or 6 times would fall into israf, where you're wasting water. And the example of that is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where somebody was, Sa'ad radiallahu anh, was doing wudu with a lot of water, and the Prophet told him to be conservative with the water, and he said, be conservative in wudu, and the Prophet said, yes, even if you're in the river. So one is that you have doubt, wudu is breaking. Now the second condition is where you're actually, something is happening to break your wudu. Let's say you have a discharge of urine, or you have a discharge of wind, and this is constantly breaking your wudu. So what do? A few basic rules about that are that if you are in a state where you are ma'zur, or you have an uzr, you have an excuse, that, and there's, fuqaha have deliberated on this a lot more than what I'm going to say, but I'm giving a very simple answer to make it easy and straight. Basically a summary of what the scholars have written on this issue. If your wudu is breaking constantly, to the point where it's breaking almost, it would have broken, or it is breaking in every salah, and so there's almost no salah where you do wudu and your wudu stays with you, particularly in that case, or if in any case where you're dealing with a situation where wudu is breaking all the time. The first rule is that when you do wudu, generally the agreement is upon your wudu will last from the time you did wudu till the end of that particular prayer. So you will do wudu again and again at the beginning of every prayer, or before your prayer time, before you start praying, I mean. So the second thing is that if you do wudu and your uzr is, for example, urine discharge, and after that you know that you are going to ignore the urine discharge, particularly if it's less than a certain amount of filth, which is usually, a hand palm of filth, or 5 dirhams worth of filth. If it's less than that, you're going to ignore it. And let's say your uzr is you're ma'zur because you have discharge of urine, and then you did your wudu, so you're going to ignore the discharge of the urine. But there are other ways wudu can be broken too. Those will still count. So for example, if your wudu was breaking all the time because of urine discharge, then if wind passes, then that will be considered you have to do wudu again. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Second thing is that as long as, no matter how many times the wudu is breaking for that particular reason for which is your excuse, you just have to make wudu again in the next prayer. if there was no, let's say, discharge of urine, or no wind was passing, or no vomit came out, or no tears from some disease came out, or any of your pimples that have when you break the pimple, the najas comes out. If nothing comes out that will break your wudu, if nothing comes out, I mean, if so, whatever comes out that will break your wudu will be considered the breaking of your wudu, other than the fact for which you have the uzr, your excuse. Okay, so I've already mentioned that, so that should be clear. And then if your wudu stays, meaning there's no discharge of any sort, and you go into the next prayer time, then that's valid too. Then you have a valid wudu remaining. You don't have to redo your wudu for that prayer for which there was no hadas, no discharge of any sort, even not for the reason of for your uzr, or not even the reason for what is anything other than your uzr, meaning not for your excuse, which is, let's say, your urine discharge, and not anything other than your urine discharge too. I hope I'm not making this more complicated than it needs to be. Simply, you can do wudu at the beginning of every prayer, and then after that, and also just as a just an understanding in terms of a mas'ala, sometimes you can defer to another dalil, or a lesser dalil, or a different dalil to make things easy for you. So in this Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, who was amongst the tabi'een, he was in the amongst the time of Imam Abu Hanifa, so he is like a hujjah. He was a scholar of the Sharia of Islam at that time, and he had the opinion that if you have up to, like, so let's say if there's dhuhr of 4 rak'ah, if your wind passes after the 2 rak'ah, then the salah breaks. Before that, it doesn't break. So that's also something to consider, that if you have a problem that is of a medium sort, then you can incline towards the opinion of Jafar rahmatullah alayh, and he was a grandson of the Prophet and teacher of Imam Abu Hanifa, and so he was a faqih, and just as somebody amongst the khairul qurun qarni thumma alladhina yulunahum, because he's amongst the tabi'een, and so because of being amongst the tabi'een, his opinion counts as a dalil in itself, and clearly he would not be somebody of that generation who forms an opinion without any basis. But anyway, the point being that sometimes there are shaz opinions. For example, the shaz opinion that you can pray tahajjud without sleeping. There's an opinion like that. In the same way, there's an opinion that if your wind blows after the 2 rak'ah, it breaks the salah. But it breaks the salah. I think maybe if I said it wrong, I should say this right. If the wind breaks within the 2 rak'ahs, it breaks the salah. After that, meaning after the 2 rak'ahs, it doesn't break the salah. So I just want that to be clear. Maybe I said it wrong. So the first, let's say it's 4 rak'ah, the first 2 salah is preserved. There was no breaking of wudu. So basically, as long as the majority of the salah, you prayed most of the salah while in the state of wudu, then there can be, even normally in his opinion, that if your wudu is gone after that, or there's some, let's say, passing of the wind or anything happens, then your wudu is not broken for that salah. That salah is valid and it counts. So you don't have to break that salah in his opinion. Anyway, so this is just again to just summarize. There is the feeling that my wudu has broken versus you actually have a issue where it is breaking. It's a medical problem, and for the medical problem, all you have to do is just do wudu again before every salah, and and then just follow the procedure that I gave you. And also, like I said, you can also incline to the opinion of one of the great tabi'een of Islam, and you can also borrow from his opinion if your situation is such that it needs that opinion. Thank you. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.